through the years there has been some quite crazy lion shizzle going on. Back in the past, menageries were a big draw, and the everyday folk were fascinated by them. Fascinated by the lion cage and the danger within. So much so it became a thing to try and do yourself. Now let's start with wagers. Often a bet was to be had to do something crazy, and a lion's cage was one of those things. Lion tamers made it look so easy. Surely they weren't dangerous at all. In Spain, Delmonico's menagerie, a lady made a bet of 5,000 pesetas that she would enter the lion's den. A huge crowd gathered as the lady entered the cage with just a small whip. She even put her head into the lion's mouth and sat down on him whilst among the rest of the lion family. She walked out to massive applause. What no one said was she was actually a member of the troupe. At Bingley Hall in 1890, a challenge was announced. There be no man that possesses the courage enough to enter the lion's den. But Mr. H. Peacock from the Star Hotel stood up to that challenge. The hall was filled with spectators, and he was described as a jolly good fellow. The lion tamer went in first and pushed the lions back so Mr. Peacock could get in. And in he went, brandishing his revolver. The 3 lions that were in there roared their disapproval. The tamer started routine and had the lions prancing around their cage, all with Mr. Peacock stood in the middle. All was well in the end with this story, as he managed to get out nice and safe, even by putting the revolver in the face of one of the lions. They weren't very impressed, but he got out safely. Now in Portsmouth in 1884, Colonel Boone and Miss Carlotta entered with a naval officer after several bets were made to say he would not enter the cage. He entered with the colonel, walked around the animals. When he exited the cage, greeted with a resounding applause, he went to the curtain 5 times at least because there was so much support for him. Now, a Bolton publican, William Corshaw, wagered £25 that he could go into a cage with 3 lions. There was a massive crowd. The animals seemed to resent the fact that William was in with them, but they did not harm him. He also stated afterwards that no amount of money would ever make him go do it again. Now another crazy feat that seemed to be all the rage was being shaved in a lion's cage. Not something you would really think of doing, but they clearly did. And here are a few stories. In 1894, a Madrid barber at the Cirque Paris did exactly this. He had a massive crowd, aristocrats, all the other barbers that were in the local area. After the normal circus performance, the lion's cage was wheeled out and the barber entered the cage with his kit. The lion tamer put his lions through their paces and then he sat down for his shave. Once he had finished one side, a lion growled and he retreated out of the cage. Unfortunately, the tamer only had half done. As he left, he announced, "I humbly feel I have done enough. Let another gentleman of the profession finish the tamer's other side." There was no response, and the cage was wheeled back. Now, I'm assuming somebody went and redid his other side. He wasn't just lopsided forever. In 1891, a Spanish barber tried the same thing, but he fainted, so he didn't really get very far. In 1896, in South Africa, Johannesburg, at Phyllis's Circus, a nightly show occurred, as Mr. Bloxham guaranteed a shave in 2 minutes every night. Now, to mix the shaving and the wager up a little bit, in Essex in 1900 a wager was made that a certain hairdresser would not have the courage to shave the tamer in a cage with 2 Asiatic lions. Mr. Albert Snow took the challenge, and although they tried to keep it a secret, a reasonable sized crowd did appear. In a field near the Red Line at Hockerill, the trainer started by telling the crowd that they must be quiet and not make a sound when Mr. Snow entered the cage. I could not answer to the consequences if there was a noise made. The tamer entered and Mr. Snow followed, and while Mr. Snow was setting up all his kit, one of the lions got up but just started pacing backwards and forwards and kind of did nothing. He carried on with the shave and there was nothing. Tamer even said that it was the best shave he'd ever had. So can't all be bad being shaved in a lion's den, I suppose. Now, not leaving the women out, there was a woman barber in Manchester who did exactly this as well, and all she got from the lions was a yawn as they kind of just watched on. So obviously all these lions are very tame indeed, or maybe have just had their dinner. Now, what about just for fun? You wouldn't think it would be fun, would you? So the wages you get, you're going to get some money out of it, but some people just wanted to do it just for the sheer notoriety of it, the fact that they could say, "Look what I've done." Here are a couple from One Wales Menagerie, which was quite a famous menagerie back in its day. In Cardiff, Mr Wiltshire entered the cage with a tamer, with a crowd of thousands gathered. He stood there while the animals did their normal routine and then exited to great cheers. Then there was an announcement made that William Samuels, a champion boxer and local innkeeper, would enter the lion's cage. The band started the proceedings by playing "For He's a Jolly Good Fellow." Excuse my singing. Madame Salva, the tamer, was supposed to accompany him, but he insisted on doing it himself, stating that he was going to outdo anybody else. Now, although the crowd were cheering, there was trepidation in their cheers, a combination of excitement and fear. Samuels was as cool as a cucumber in his boxing gear and rosette pinned to his chest, and cudgel, which apparently I've just found out is a bit like a club. The lions weren't fussed about him at all, and he wandered around the group of about one male and about a dozen females. He held the club to the nose of one of the lions, and it was met with a roar of rage. He proceeded to make the lions jump about the cage a few times, rather brashly. The proprietors were ready for anything that was going to happen, brandishing hot irons toward the lion's back if need be. He even shot his pistol as he was exiting the cage, and in a daring move, went up to the gate with his back to the lions and accepted a certificate through the cage. Slightly crazy, but he still exited without a problem at all. Now, sometimes children were involved as well. This case, it was the tamer's daughter who was 12 years old. Now, he was taken to court afterwards because of this. He claimed that it was toothless and paralysed, but the judge didn't quite see it like that and stated, "A little girl should not make the acquaintance of even a toothless lion." And he was fined £2. Now, on to injuries. It all seems so okay so far, isn't it? Like, nobody's got hurt, everybody's got their money, everybody's happy, although we've got a half-shaved tamer, but you know, everybody's happy. And I'm afraid my first one is a child of the age of 10. She was doing a dance in the cage with a large crowd. As she entered the cage, a lion knocked her down and with one swipe of its paw attempted to attack her. The trainers were on it straight away with red hot irons and managed to get the girl out. The proprietor was arrested afterwards. Now we have the famous Madame Morelli, who adventured to Brazil on a yacht, had a narrow escape when entering the cage for a show called The Wild Beasts Boudoir. She was to lie on the bed of the cage with the lionesses on each side. Many rehearsals had gone really well until the last one, when one of the lionesses got a little bit agitated and swiped Madame Morelli harshly on the hip. The lion tamer jumped in and basically saved her life. She was taken home and seen by a doctor. She ended up with a fever, but nothing was seen as fatal. She was lucky. In France, a lady entered the den who was hypnotised. She wasn't quite so lucky. She survived, but the lion attacked her legs and she had to have one amputated. At the Apollo Music Hall, two performers, the sisters Rosie, were above the lion's cage performing a dance across a tightrope. When they got to the centre of the rope, it snapped and they fell into the lion's den. Screams from the audience and women fainting all over the place. The elder sister crawled towards the exit while the younger stood up and was knocked down by the lions. The lion tamer entered but was not armed, not even a whip. His voice commands did the work, however, and he was able to hold back the lions so the sisters could be pulled out. The youngest one of the sisters was the worst off, having been mauled for her chest and her shoulders. It took her a fair few weeks to get over it, but they did both survive. Okay, I'm going to give you one death. A young clerk, Leon Essett, aged 24, had access to the cages because he knew the proprietor. But he didn't want to wait around. He wanted his photograph taken with it while he was in the middle of the cage. Unfortunately, he did this without telling anybody he was going to do it. He entered the then empty cage and approached the lion cage where the fabulous Romulus was asleep. He tried to wake him, but to no avail. But in doing so, he accidentally opened the bars separating the two cages. All of a sudden, Romulus was very much awake, bounded through the gap and took the poor clerk's head in his mouth. They say he was probably killed instantaneously, and the lion dragged his body to the corner of the cage. One of the menagerie's young workers heard the commotion, could not do anything to help, so ran for the trainers. The trainer eventually managed to get the lion to abate, but it was far too late for poor Leon. He was fairly mutilated, mangled, and it wasn't nice. Okay, on to some little more light-hearted things. Silly things. Fun things, I suppose, if you class going into a lion's cage fun. In Brighton in 1902, a game of ping pong was to be had in the cage of a dozen lions. Thousands turned up to watch the feat, and the lions were not fussed in one way whatsoever. The only time they were a little bit fussed was when a ball headed their way, which the trainer retrieved, obviously, not the players. The game was concluded with no issues, and they shook hands and exited the cage. Now, fancy getting married in a lion's cage? A few people did. One, the minister, was too scared to go in the cage, so stood outside with the bride and groom inside. And if getting married wasn't a little bit weird, how about christening your children in a lion's cage? There was one particular merchant who did this, who had to a crowd of 500, and he was insistent on christening his son in the lion's cage. Bit weird. But I suppose everybody's different. And in Wales, a lady decided she fancied a bit of knitting, and she said she would go into the lion's cage and knit the tamer a scarf. Little bit weird as well, but you know, she did it, and she came out and put the scarf on the tamer's neck. There was also a couple of games of dominoes and cards as well, I believe. All very weird sort of things, but you know, whatever you like. There's also a man in Vienna who was dying. He knew he was dying, so he decided he wanted to spend his last days in a lion's cage. When he knew the end was near, he got somebody to move his bed into the cage, where he spent a week slowly dying until the day he did, in the lion's cage. Now, there was also the story of the young lad who proposed to an Irish girl. She said she would tell him his answer the next night in the big tent. When he turned up, he found her on the other side of the lion's cage with the lions, and she said, "I'll marry you if you come in with me." He turned round and ran away, and she never saw him again. Now, the last one. Hannah, in 1703, was supposedly the first person to be killed by, well, okay, not a lion, but a tiger. She worked in the White Lion pub though as a barmaid, so that's close. Her death is recorded in the Malmesbury Parish Register, and her gravestone is still in the corner of the churchyard of Malmesbury Abbey, with a memorial poem alluding to her death. Hannah, killed by a tiger in Ye White Lion. Hi guys, don't forget, please subscribe and hit the notification bell, and like if you like as well. Brilliant, thanks.